All right, for this next project, we're going to be learning how to create a mug structure. So in this video, I'm going to show you the basics for creating that structure. You're going to need a bunch of tools from your toolkit. So a wire cutter, you're going to need a ruler and a pair of scissors and a pen or pencil to make a template. You're going to need to borrow a tube from class, not mandatory, so you don't need it at home if you don't have it. You're also going to need a needle tool to cut your clay, and you're going to need a rake to slip and score. Okay, so the first step I'm going to do is roll out a slab. Now, I sent you guys home with a lot of clay. You only need about an inch thickness or a half an inch in thickness to create a 12-inch by 4-inch mug. I'm having most students create a template for this project. If you want your mug to be taller than 4 inches, make your template taller than 4 inches, but still 12 inches long, okay? That's gonna be our finished mug size, so you'll have a mug that's 4 by 4 inches. Next thing you need are your wooden slats or magazines. Remember, they need to be the same thickness, and you want them roughly 1/4 of an inch thick, okay? So that's about 1/4 of an inch thick. If it's a little bit thinner than that, it's fine. You don't want it any thicker than 1/4 inch though, because it's gonna be awkward to drink from. Okay, so first step is gonna be to roll this slab. So I used my template to kind of get an idea of how long I'm gonna need this to be. And I'm using a large rolling pin in the classroom, because we have those that you can borrow and use for class. You can always use your small roller, or you can throw it against the table to make it a little bit thinner so it's easier to roll. Okay. My tip to you is to stand when you do this and always roll from the middle towards the ends. That way, you're not going to get a lot of cracking. You won't get some really thin spots and thick spots. And just make sure you move those measuring devices, magazines, wooden slats, whatever you're using, to be in the same area that you're rolling. Okay, that's the important part. Next thing I'm doing is using my metal rib, and I am smoothing the surface of my clay. I'm rolling over it again because I've got some unevenness, and I want to make sure my mug is nice and even and symmetrical. Okay, I'm going to take my template, and I have a lot of clay, so I'm gently rolling over it, and it actually sticks to the clay because it's tar paper, and tar paper is actually meant for roofing homes, but it's really good and durable to make a template or like a stencil on your clay. Okay, you're going to roll it out, smooth it out, cut it with your needle tool, save your scraps because you can use those for the base of your structure. And then I'm going to roll mine a little bit thinner because I noticed that it was a little too thick to drink out of. I just don't, if you look at a cup in your house, it's thinner than 1/4 of an inch in its overall wall thickness. So I want to make sure that mine is comfortable to drink from. And then I'm going to smooth it out with my metal rib, and I'm using my template a second time just to trim off some of that excess clay. Okay, your next step is going to be to smooth it out on both sides. So I'm using a tube in the classroom. These are just poster tubes that we were donated. I put saran wrap over it, so that way if the clay does stick a little bit, it will stick to the saran wrap and you can still pull the tube out. Okay. I forgot to smooth out both sides. So I'm going to flip it. I'm smoothing out both sides of my slab with my metal rib. That way the inside is smooth as well. And then I'm going to roll it up against the saran wrap side of the tube. And then I'm actually going to push on the ends of this and flatten the two ends a little bit, just so that way it's not really, really thick when I slip and squirt together. Okay, I do this step while it's still on the tube for support. So that's going to be my mold or my support system for this project using that tube. You can use a pop can, a glass from your house, whatever you choose. Put saran wrap or plastic wrap over it just in case your clay sticks. You can slide the tube or the glass from the saran wrap. All right, now I am slipping and scoring the edges. So I've flattened out those two ends, the short 4-inch ends. I flattened them just with my fingers slightly, just pressing down, slipped and scored, and then I'm going to match them up so that they only overlap maybe a half an inch at maximum. If it's more than a half an inch, your wall is going to be extra thick in that spot, and it's really hard to get rid of that extra thickness. Okay, you can see how I blend the overlapped side into the other end of the slab. And then I use a metal rib to smooth this out. Okay, so I sped this up so you don't have to watch me do this very tediously. I blend from left to right to make sure that line is blended in completely. I hit the top part, make sure that's blended in. I'll do the bottom, and then I'm going to go vertically to thin out that section just to make sure it's not super thick. Okay, now I'm going to go to my bottom. So I've got some scraps from my slab overall. I do the same thing. I'm going to roll this a little bit thinner just because it seems a little thick, and I want to make sure it's going to be big enough. Flip it on the other side, smooth out both sides. I take my whole piece and I am tracing around it. So I am using my needle tool to trace and cut, and I leave like a 1/4 inch border around the sides just so it's not going to be too small. And I'm using one of those bowl shaped molds that we have in the classroom. You don't have to use that for your base. Your base can be flat. Okay, I'm making sure my seam is really connected. I'm making sure that my mug or my cup wall form is really smooth and it's round and it's the right structure and shape I'm going with. Okay, and then I'm going to gently pull the tube from here. You don't want to attach the bottom with the tube or your support system still inside. That's how things get stuck. Okay, the nice thing about the plastic wrap is you can always slide your structure from the inside, so your cup or your support system out from the plastic wrap, and then that way it doesn't get messed up. All right, we're slipping and scoring. So I'm adding water with my rake. You don't need a ton of water if your clay is pretty soft, but you do want a little bit of water to help that surface adhere to the other surface. Okay, I am scratching and attaching both parts. Okay, you can see that my seam on the inside isn't blended super well, so I'm going to kind of blend that a little bit, score up the remaining parts, and I'm going to flip it onto my mug base. All right, before you really press down, I like to kind of gently squeeze the sides just to reshape it. And this is kind of like if you're picking up a baby bird, is what I always tell people. You never want to crush your project. You gently just want to form it. Okay, you'll see on that inside bottom edge, you'll have a seam. You're going to need to use your wooden knife to blend that seam together. So I use it to blend the bottom edge that I just attached and my walls together. Okay, you want to make sure you do this very well. So it doesn't matter if you use the pointy end or the rounded end, but you want to make sure that you've got this well attached. Okay, you can kind of see in there, I don't have a line anymore. I have blended that thoroughly so that way it doesn't pop apart as it dries. I'm going to take my sponge, and mine's still a little bit wet. It's really easy to dent and misshapen your mug as it's wet, but I want to make sure I smooth out the rim and get it pretty even before I let it firm up. So I'm going to flip it upside down now, and I'm using my needle tool to trim off any excess clay from the base that's hanging over the edge. Okay, and then I'm going to use my metal rib again and blend these together. Okay, blending is super important. If you don't blend, one, the bottom of your piece is going to look crappy and look like you didn't really care about it. You want to pay attention to that. Second thing, it's going to help prevent your seam from popping apart again. So I'm just smoothing this out as much as I can while it's still wet. Remember, it's easier to manipulate and, you know, change the shape of it and have it firm up when it's a little bit stiffer. So please make sure your walls are nice and even. You can pinch them a little bit thinner if you need to. Okay, and that's really going to help keep your piece kind of unified. Cool. So if you look from the top, you can see it's as round as I can get it while it's still kind of wet. My walls are nice and even. I'm going to grab a ruler and just show you that it is 4 inches wide on the top, and it is going to be 4 inches tall on the sides. Okay, that's your first step. Go for it.